Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jesse O'Connell, Chief Advancement Officer at ACE, and I'm so pleased to be with you here today for this important conversation about AI, authentic learning, and the future of higher education. We're grateful to present today's webinar in conjunction with Studiosity, an ACE Thought Leadership Circle member whose work sits directly at the intersection of student support, learning validation, and responsible AI use. On campuses across the country, AI is impacting how students study, how faculty teach, how institutions think about assessment, and how employers evaluate readiness. It offers tremendous possibilities, more personalized support, greater access to feedback, new ways to explore ideas, and tools that can help students move through their academic journeys with more confidence. But it also raises urgent questions about how we measure what students are actually learning, how they demonstrate that learning, and how institutions protect the value of the degrees they award. At the heart of today's conversation is a simple but complex idea. The value of education depends on authentic learning. Students need opportunities to wrestle with concepts, to make mistakes, to revise their thinking and communicate their ideas, and to develop the judgment that comes from doing the work themselves. If AI removes too much of that useful struggle, we risk weakening the very skills that higher education is designed to build: critical thinking, creativity, communication, independence, and ethical decision-making. Rather than look at AI only through the deficit lens as a threat that learning that primarily needs to be detected and accounted for, today we'll explore how institutions can respond to the emergence of these technologies strategically. How do we move beyond reactive surveillance toward models that support students, validate learning, and reduce anxiety for both students and educators? How do we help students become active participants in their own learning journey, not passengers but drivers? And how do we ensure that responsible AI use strengthens rather than diminishes the credibility of higher education? So we'll approach these questions through four connected themes over the course of our conversation today: workforce readiness, the enduring value of higher education, student autonomy in an AI-enabled environment, and the responsible use of AI at the institutional level. Before we begin, I want to introduce our distinguished guests that are joining us on our panel today. We have Troy Burnett, the Senior Vice President and General Manager in North America at Studiosity. Christian Drennan is the Director of Academic Technology and Instructional Support at Oberlin College and Conservatory. And Robert Giuliano is the president of Gettysburg College. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us here this afternoon. And thanks also to all of you in our audience. We're really grateful that you're taking the time to listen and learn from what I expect is going to be a dynamic conversation on this important issue. Our panel conversation should last about 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for some questions. So please put your questions in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that to inform our Q&A later on. So let's turn to the first topic. For many students, earning a degree is closely tied to expanding opportunity and preparing for meaningful work after graduation. But employers continue to raise concerns about gaps in classroom learning and workplace expectations. So with AI rapidly reshaping both education and the labor market, these stakes get pretty high. Troy, I want to start with you. Studiosity's 2026 U.S. Student Wellbeing Report shared that students understand there's a level of AI literacy that they'll need to have going into the workforce, but they also acknowledge that there needs to be some guardrails for learning. So what have you all learned about creating campus environments that support learning in an AI landscape without compromising those core skill buildings and critical thinking and communication that we know is going to be crucial to how they move through their career?
Yeah, so first of all, for everybody, the well-being report that he's referencing, that's something that we commission every year, and we gather the data and issue a report. We donate it to the space, so it's totally free. So if you're interested in that, it's a student well-being report. And in that report, we surface some data around how students do recognize the tension between, yes, I am using AI, but I'm no longer confident that I'm learning when I'm using AI. And so there's this gap and this friction or tension. And so I think just acknowledging that AI literacy, yes, is becoming a workforce requirement, but also AI dependency is not employability. And so I think it's recognizing that the role of higher education is to exist in the current AI-enabled landscape, but to stay focused on teaching and learning and building core skills, building those skills that are employable and relevant in the workplace. And so, it's tools and structures and programs that support and build capability and skills, not completing tasks. Because AI will just complete any task for us now. And so it's much less about the output or the asset that results, like a paper, but it's much more about the learning that took place, and showing evidence that that learning took place.
Yeah, that's great, Troy. I really appreciate that. Bob, I want to move to you. So, as a campus leader, obviously you're very focused on being able to tell the story about the outcomes on your campus, how many students graduate, where they end up afterwards. And we know that, we've seen evidence that AI is helping some students progress through their undergraduate journey at a more rapid pace. But sometimes they don't have all of these kind of building blocks to successfully transition in the workforce. So, uh, through this educator lens, how can higher ed embrace AI in a way that prepares students for the workforce, but not at the expense of the actual student learning process?
In some respects, Jesse, this is not a new question. Higher education has had to adapt to technological changes and the impact it has on pedagogy and the way students access and assess information. It has a hyper reality to it, given the intensity and the effectiveness of AI. But adaptation has been a requirement. Gettysburg College is about to turn 200 years old. It's not teaching the same way it did when it was founded in 1832. And I'm hoping that in 2132, we're not going to be teaching the same way we are today. So I think part of it is the very thing we're doing today. We're putting the question explicitly on the table. And we recognize that there is a disruption in the traditional means of learning that AI is introducing. Now, one of the themes I think I'll sound throughout our conversation today is one of humility. This is adapting pretty quickly. And I've at least been pretty cautious about declaring an answer. So what we're doing on our campus is actually, in a sense, slowing it down, but also acting with some pace on the question. So we started a 3-year initiative that is designed simply to ask the question of our students, of our faculty, of our employers, of our community at large, how do we effectively adapt? So if people came here hoping I would come up, here is the answer to the question. We're not going to get there today, Jesse. But I think the starting point is by engaging your campus in a very purposeful way, recognizing that we will need to adapt. We're good at adaptation, actually. And it's just going to take some time to figure out, and time, and I would add one other factor, experimentation. So what we're trying to do this first year is not impose a straitjacket on anyone, but encourage as much faculty and student experimentation as is possible. And then let's begin to learn from what those experiments suggest to us about how authentic learning can take place, where the guardrails should be set. We've got a ways to go before we have clarity of answers, but we're not going to get there without asking the questions first.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this theme of sort of thoughtfulness and considering the full range of stakeholder engagement on our campuses is going to be a theme that we kind of return to throughout this conversation. Chris, you sit at a pretty interesting place in higher education, right? Oberlin is both a college, but it's also a music conservatory. And I would imagine that students are leaving your campus to pursue careers in the arts and creative disciplines in addition to a range of other careers. Talk to us a little bit about, and my understanding is Oberlin, you guys have just spent about a year doing some of this AI exploration and experimentation that Bob just mentioned. Tell us a little bit about what you guys have learned, and specifically, I'd love to hear about that relationship to kind of artistic creation and creativity.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. So I want to echo a little bit of what Troy and Bob have both said in my response. One of the most encouraging things that we have learned as part of our year of exploration is that AI is an effective tool. However, it is just that. It's a tool in our toolboxes. And when you have a tool in a toolbox, it's used for a very specific purpose. And we took a lot of time talking with our college community about cognitive offloading and cognitive debt. And without getting too deeply into the weeds, offloading is, a very human thing to do. I like to tell the story of, I've used a calculator for a number of years as a ways to offload. And then when my kids started doing long division, I had long since lost that requisite skill, and now they're coming to me asking for help with homework. And so because of that offloading, now I'm in a realm of cognitive debt where I've lost that ability. And so prolonged offloading can really lead into some difficult problems that we want to address with our students. And so AI creates a new avenue for this kind of long-time human problem. And that said, AI is really good at generating ideas, and it's good at organizing information, which is helpful in like the planning and project management phase of creativity or the creative process. And so truly creative works still belong to us. It's our judgment, it's our interpretation. our emotional expression, our artistic voice, all of those kind of help us to determine what is meaningful when it comes to creativity. And so the human responsibility still lies within the productive struggle and the creative process. And while AI can, thinking about the musicology, AI can help create a melody, or, from a writing perspective, it can help to draft an essay, but it can't really replace the lived experiences and perspectives and intellectual curiosity that make our arguments or our stories compelling. And so at Oberlin, as you correctly said, we're kind of this both liberal arts and also conservatory, where we have a distinct problem where, we don't want to have this one size fits all approach when it comes to AI on campus. And so we learned really, really quickly that our students and our faculty and our staff, we're all really approaching AI from vastly different creative ways. And so our challenge became shifting from using AI as producing a final work to coaching and organizing our community to use that as the creative draft, or asking better questions, or evaluating ideas. And then the human in the loop can exercise the judgment of those skills. And so I think what our unique challenges moving forward is equipping our students and our community to really think about AI ethically, and to explore the tool as more of just a tool, and maintaining that productive struggle rather than offloading to it.
Yeah, that's great. I can totally see kind of that interplay on the creative side, especially. So I want to pivot a little bit to a next topic, which is, so we're touching on kind of workforce readiness, kind of what employers are expecting from students that are coming off our campuses. But I think it goes without saying that those of us on this panel, all of us that work in higher ed, know that a post-secondary credential, a college degree, has a lot of intrinsic value beyond whatever workforce signal it's sending, or it's sort of beyond kind of the skills that our employers are expecting. And we know that kind of the development of some of these skills is a question that's coming up as we see more and more sort of AI tool use on our campuses. So, Bob, tell us a little bit about kind of this mapping of learning versus skills that employers expect. Sort of how are we kind of actually sort of doing an accurate job talking about what our students are actually learning, like what's the value of this learning that we have on campus, sort of as we encounter some of these newer technologies.
I just want to build off something that Chris said a moment ago, that AI will commoditize those things that can be commoditized. Rote tasks are going to happen. So the responsibility I think that colleges and universities have will sit in the space of the things that are distinctively delivered by people. And again, this is not new to schools like Oberlin and Gettysburg, a liberal arts education that is seeking to educate the whole person, getting them ready for a life of contribution and service. And it starts, I think, with an understanding that we're not the transmission of technical knowledge. That's not been the goal of an institution like Gettysburg. We're helping people to figure out how to think, how to lead organizations, how to communicate effectively, how to adapt to changed circumstances. Though we call them enduring skills, and we use the word enduring purposefully, Jesse, because they were as relevant 10 years ago as they are today, and I will argue that they are going to be yet more relevant a decade from now. Earlier today, I was meeting with an alum in the media business, and he was commenting about how wildly quickly his world is changing, and why he is succeeding is not because he knows the nuts and bolts of the way in which the media is transmitted, but he is able to lead an organization through rapidly changing times. And if you look at what employers are saying increasingly, again, not new, but amplified, they are looking for graduates who are able to adapt, who are able to create that partnership with AI, use it as a tool, but not as the answer. Lead their teams in the same ways. So I think our responsibility is to be more purposeful in making sure that our students graduate with those skills, not do it simply in the classroom, but the charm of institutions like mine is that students learn in a variety of settings, including in their co-curricular activities, their leadership or fraternities, or whatever it is it's going to be. Let's make all of those activities as intentionally growth-oriented as they possibly can. And then finally, something that we need to do yet more of is make sure we're continuing the dialogue with employers, because their needs are going to adapt. One of the questions, and if anyone can answer this question in the audience, I would welcome it. I asked employers I asked my alum this question earlier today. What does an entry level job look like today? And what does an entry job level look like 2 years from now? We don't have an answer to that yet. But I think we need to engage employers and graduate schools, by the way, in those very questions to make sure that we're continuing to calibrate the experiences and the outcomes to meet those needs.
Yeah, I think that's right, Bob. Our universities, have always been centers of acquiring knowledge. And I think that's very transparent to a lot of people. But I think reemphasizing that also we play this huge role in teaching people how to think, teaching people how to analyze, teaching people how to contextualize what they're encountering. All of that feels increasingly important, even in the face of some of these changing tools.
Jesse, I think that's where the game's going to get played. I really do think the game's going to get played with those people, with those skills. Those are the students who are going to thrive most in society in the years ahead.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. Chris, I want to come back to you because, sort of the role that you are in very direct contact with students, right? Sort of you're thinking about the design of instructional support. And we know that there's some generational changes in how students are both, kind of comfortable with things like this, how they sort of what they're expecting about their learning. Tell us a little bit about what are you hearing from students themselves about how they're thinking about academic achievement, how they're thinking about kind of this, gaining knowledge, gaining skills. Are there some things that have been surprising you as you've talked to your students?
Actually, the biggest surprise from the students have been their level of interest in really digging into the ethical piece about AI. We're very proud to have a student governance structure that kind of takes the lead on our academic integrity statements. And so, the students recognize that AI was changing a lot about how they are engaging with the critical thinking and how they're working through their classes. And so they took it upon themselves under the coaching of our, student affairs office to really go in and revision what the academic integrity language needs to be inclusive of this whole AI change. Like you said, we've spent the last roughly 9 to 10 months digging through this year of AI exploration, and it's been deeply focused on AI literacy, AI governance, student experiences, faculty feedback, and kind of how we collectively learn how Oberlin is going to approach AI very intentionally and very ethically. And we've tried to focus on both the operational side as well as the educational outcomes, rather than just keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. And so the question has shifted from what can this tool do to what is the gap that we have? What is that operational need that we have? What kind of learning or teaching or work related skills are we trying to support? And from there, we've really kind of considered the additional factors of intellectual property or privacy or security concerns. And so we also have to think very much about how that tool intersects with our institutional values, and the core of which is our academic integrity and the Commission on Writing and our students' productive struggle. And so that's really kind of guided our year of exploration and how we wanted AI to be a helpful tool, but not to really replace the critical thinking that we're trying to build within our students. And again, to maintain the creative focus that we're known for.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Troy, I want to draw you back into the conversation. I know, Chris is talking about kind of assessing learning and, how are we kind of ensuring that students are understanding the journey that they're on. And I know you guys have spent a fair amount of time grappling with this question of, how do we validate learning in a classroom with the assist of AI, but without sacrificing, kind of these really important principles that we've just heard Bob and Chris talking about.
Yeah. First of all, very aligned with what Chris is saying around that productive struggle. And, just as an example, our Studiosity platform doesn't provide any answers or write for students in the writing feedback functionality. And so by design, we preserve that productive struggle where learning actually happens, even though it is AI enabled. And so there's just very strict boundaries around that interaction and what that looks like, designed to align with pedagogy and not for productivity, right? And so as for the validation, validation is fundamentally different from detection. And our view is that the police and punish and detect model is probably no longer fit for service in higher education because detection asks, did they plagiarize? Did AI write this? Whereas validation asks, um, can the student demonstrate ownership of their work? Can the student demonstrate learning took place? And so we're seeing a lot of tools pop up right now. And by the way, if you haven't seen the latest New York Times article, it came out last week, written by Dana Goldstein. Fantastic article that really kind of outlines the landscape in terms of all these AI tools that are sort of fighting each other. There's a bit of a cat and mouse game going on when it comes to detection. And so that becomes a dead end. It becomes an arms race that institutions invest a lot of money in that doesn't really get the outcome that we all want. Meanwhile, 77% of students, this comes from the well-being report, by the way, that we've linked here. 77% of students have fear and anxiety that they're going to be wrongly accused of AI misuse, even those that are authentically doing the work. And so it's these factors that we're seeking to cut through. And we've built a workflow that helps students self-validate all along the way, supporting good academic communication and writing. And so this self-validation, here's what it sort of looks like. It's authorship signals based on their established linguistic identity. So we're using AI to sort of look at that. And then it's enabling them to explain their decisions and portray understanding of their own work through a bit of a brief timed Q&A session. There's other factors and layers to this approach, but basically we're shifting the focus from final artifact, like here's the output, here's the paper, and now you have to like put on your detective hat and try to determine how much work I did. We're shifting the focus away from that to let's look at these signals and validate that work and effort took place and learning took place. And so that's kind of our new approach, and happy to show anyone how we've taken that approach.
Yeah, no, I think the kind of reinforcing signals there seems critical to kind of what we're seeing emerge. And the notion of a linguistic identity, as a guy who uses a lot of M dashes in his writing, I don't love that has somehow become a signal of AI writing, right? So you take my M dashes from me, when I'm cold and in the ground. But Troy, I think in your last answer, I think an element that I was picking up on is this notion, this anxiety that students are feeling, right? That they're not actually sure where they have autonomy, where they don't. Are they doing the right thing? Are they doing the wrong thing? And that actually that feels like a really important thing for us to be kind of contemplating as we think about the responsible ways to use these tools. And a phrase that I have heard you use in the past is this notion of students being a driver instead of a passenger in their AI use, right? And sort of how they're engaging with these tools. Tell me a little bit more about kind of specifically what you mean by that and how that's actually kind of being put into practice. As you spent a lot of time talking to different institutions. Like, where are you seeing this notion of driver versus passenger?
Sure. Well, sort of to go back to this whole police and punish model that we're trying to get higher education away from, it's a fraught dynamic between student and educator. Because on one hand, you've got, again, those students that are, even those that are doing the work and putting in an honest effort, turning in assignments and kind of just bracing themselves for, a AI detection to false positively, alert for academic violation. By the way, you mentioned the dash thing, and it's picking up on certain students. English as a second language students are getting flagged for these things when they're honestly doing the work, and so it's a problematic approach. And then on the educator side, you've got educators that are rightfully very frustrated at seeing work that's submitted that obviously shortcuts were taken, learning didn't necessarily take place, and so this dynamic can be toxic, and we're looking to get away from that, and we're looking to agency is really one of our design principles. So student agency, acting rather than being acted upon, so no longer a suspect but being an active part of their learning journey. And so where AI comes into play is it's a coach and a tutor but never the author. And then we also leverage AI to help or enable the student to self-validate their effort, their learning, as opposed to, just focusing on the output. And so we're allowing them to explain their own ideas, demonstrate their learning, and they're participating actively in that validation process. So by the time they submit their final asset or paper, they already have Studiosity validated, green check mark. They don't have that anxiety or angst when submitting their assignment. And then on the professor side, they see that same validation, and then they can be a teacher and not a detective, and they can sort of teach to that higher order and grade the paper on its merits.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Chris, is some of that resonating with, you guys have been on this 1 year journey of experimenting with different tools. Is some of what Troy's saying aligning with the lens through which you were looking at these opportunities and the challenges that you were kind of tell us a little bit about kind of, what actually you were looking at as you were experimenting with some of these tools.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that really stood out to me that Troy was leaning into. So I think what we're all witnessing here is our version of a generational phenomenon, which unfortunately for a kid of the 80s, 90s, it seems like our generation is just being hit with change after change after change after change. And I wrestle with that with my own kids, with my own experience. I used to be able to look forward to the next week of the conclusion to the cliffhanger of the favorite TV show, whereas now I can just pop onto a streaming service and binge watch everything. And so there's this like expectation right now of just immediacy. And so one of the things that we're wrestling with is how is that impacting our students, and how do we need to look at 3 years down the road, or even just 1 year down the road, how these tools are going to be adapting the various ways that our students remain part of that curiosity and that creativity. And so I think looking back at kind of this whole year, we've tried to approach the year of AI as this community-driven perspective rather than a top-down, tool rollout. When our college president, Ambar, came to the IT organization and said, "Hey, how are we going to approach this?" We didn't want it to be this like IT tech rollout and everybody just has to follow suit with this new tool. We really wanted to say, what are we hoping to accomplish by this? What are the Oberlin values that would intersect with investigating a tool like this? And one of the initial considerations was the voices that need to have the driving factor here are our students and our faculty and our staff, not the college administration. And so we formed, a advisory group where our administrative offices can kind of be a part of the conversation, but then inviting faculty to start hosting webinars and panels. Our students were doing panel discussions through the Student Senate around the carbon neutrality that Oberlin has achieved, and how does using a generative AI tool on campus intersect with that? What are the implications of that? And so those are some of the really hard questions that we continue to kind of wrestle with. And we also try to look at, how are these tools going to impact the teaching experience, the learning experience? What kind of context are we offloading or avoiding by allowing our students on campus to utilize these tools? And so in that way, by having those hard conversations, we started by answering questions, and now we're moving into more of the implementation, experimentation phase, where we're starting to give, as Bob was mentioning, some guidelines, some bumpers. We're shying away from policies yet because we really still don't know as we're a part of this journey.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Bob, how is that resonating? I know you mentioned in your introductory comments that you were about to embark on this 3-year journey at Gettysburg. Are some of the questions that Troy and Chris mentioned that they have encountered in institutions, are those similar to how you're going to be framing it? Are there some things that are top of mind for you that haven't come up yet? Tell us about what are you expecting to focus on as you guys go on this journey?
I think we've covered the topics, but let me just reinforce. I couldn't agree more that any effort by the administration to impose an orthodoxy on this is going to be folly. It's going to be folly in part because this is pedagogy. This is really how do people learn, what's effective in the classroom, what's effective outside of the classroom, and we need to give the students and the faculty principal voice in defining that. And so this is about agency and autonomy in the settings in which learning most actively takes place. That's the first point. Second is I do think the work ahead, even in the short term, is at least clarity at the classroom level. What does each individual faculty member expect? So that the students, to Troy's point of a moment ago, the anxiety that students have that they may be one step away of crossing over a line, I do think it's incumbent upon the faculty to be as clear as they possibly can be about the expectations they have of students in this setting. And I don't want to come across as naive in the comment I'm about to make. Maybe it's a statement of optimism. Presidents are paid to be optimistic. But I think our students authentically want to learn. They are not generally looking to, it's an overstatement, but they're not generally looking to offload the learning environment because they understand that the benefit to them in the long run is going to be substantial if they're doing the work. We have to give them the voice to understand that. Our faculty needs to engage them in the dynamics of the learning process and create that sense of partnership in the way an individual classroom is constructed. In the long run, I think there will be, and I think this is, Chris, where you were going, there will be a Gettysburg view on what AI is. But we're not there yet. We shouldn't be there yet. But I do think it starts with, we have to be talking about it with our students because we know our students are using it. We have to be clear about what current expectations are. Then we need to engage the stakeholders in how do we evolve this in a way that is sensible. Last thing I'll say, and I could not agree more with Troy on this. If we approach AI from a defensive crouch, this is simply about avoiding cheating, we've missed the mark. This tool is here. It is powerful. It will be transformative. We need to figure out how to properly incorporate it into the educational mission of our institutions and to make sure our students are equipped about how to use it and how not to use it.
Yeah, that's great, Bob. And it's funny in a way, and it almost feels reductive to say this, but we're approaching this conversation about AI on campus similar to like any other issue that higher ed grapples with, which is when you've seen one college, right? Because they are all so unique to the communities they're serving, the students they have on campus. I think you're raising an important point that even as we can strive to understand our shared principles, learn from one another, lift up best practices. Ultimately, even within a campus, what's the old Clark Kerr quip is that a faculty is a bunch of academic entrepreneurs unified by a shared grievance about parking spots, right? Like, I think it's kind of the same thing here, which is every faculty member is going to have a slightly different lens on what's important to them and what they want to emphasize. And I think it's going to be incumbent on campus leaders to equip them with the right values to do things so that there's some consistency, but we have to acknowledge that there's going to be differences. Go ahead, Bob.
And Chris, it's not just a matter, or Jesse, it's not just a matter of faculty differences. I think there are disciplinary differences as well.
Yeah, sure.
That how one might use AI in physics may be very different than how we want it to be used in an English class. And I think we have to give the faculty the space to understand that there are disciplinary objectives that may result in very different orientations to the use of the technology.
Yeah, that's right. And Bob, I'm going to keep you on the mic here as we sort of move to kind of the fourth facet that I wanted to talk about this afternoon, which is this.
Hey, Jesse.
Yeah,
Jesse,
please. Yeah,
I have a thought from what Bob just said. I'm so glad that he talked about like this faculty issue of like really clearly communicating expectations to students and reducing that friction and anxiety on the student level. And so I just want to pose like a kind of a hypothetical question. What if educators, in setting up their assignment or task, could select the appropriate level of AI use, leveraging the AI assessment scale? For those of you that are familiar with that, it's not binary. It's not no AI, unmitigated AI. It's sort of like these levels of appropriate use of AI given a particular task. So what if setting up that task, the educator was able to select how much AI they're comfortable with for that assessment, in addition to sort of, a core, moderate, or substantial level of rigor applied to validating the effort and learning that took place in that task. That's what we've designed. We've been working with Michael Perkins, one of the developers of the AI assessment scale, in sort of fitting that model into an assignment setup. And then applying, of course, our technology, the Studiosity Validate, in sort of helping students align. So the marbles in the jar is the student effort and evidence, right? And that's meeting the mark of validation for that assignment. So that's kind of an illustration of how we're approaching that bilateral understanding of how much is appropriate for a given assessment.
Yeah, that's great, Troy. And actually, I see there's a response in the chat that someone's offering that their campus does something similar about setting the level of use. And look, it's a good framework. I mean, very few things we engage with are all in or all out, right? Like I do think the binary here is not that useful, and it's more about like what are the actual appropriate applications. I think that's a great perspective to be pulling into this. And candidly, it relates to our final topic, which is this notion of responsible AI use, right? Like we are touching on responsibility and this notion of what's the appropriate amount. But we know there's a bunch of different dimensions to what responsible use means. And so, Bob, I'm going to come to you first here, and this aligns with several of the questions we've already gotten in the chat. Look, you have a variety of stakeholders on your campuses who have different priorities that matter to them across a range of issues. Certainly, sustainability and climate impact is one that we know matters to a lot of stakeholders in the higher ed community, and several questions in the chat have kind of borne on this issue of environmental impact. But talk to me a little bit about like how are you balancing these different priorities? How are you balancing the benefits versus the impacts, and kind of navigating the fact that people are coming to this conversation with different things that are the most important to them?
The good news, this is what we do really well, right? This is what our institutions are designed to do, which is we don't spoon feed our communities answers. We talk about these hard questions. We put them on the table, whether it's environmental sustainability, whether it's privacy and security, whether it's the question that I think Chris alluded to, what is creativity? What does it mean? What's the limits of intellectual property? Those are not questions society has answered. These are not questions I think institutions are quite ready to answer in any definitive way. But what we do really well, Chris, is put these questions in front of our community, and then our faculty, our students, our communities as a whole engage in them and begin to create the grist that will permit not only our campuses, but ideally the broader society to struggle, because there are these, again, this is also not binary. AI is not going away. What should be the limits? How do we think about the environmental impact? No one's got an answer to that yet. But the starting point is by asking the question, engaging our communities, getting those tools that we deploy every day, and understanding societal questions deployed here, and begin to elucidate the options and the implications. And that's the next step. Eventually, there will be answers, or at least views, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So Chris, and I want to come to you next. Obviously, we sort of back in the first topic, we touched a little bit on kind of the notion of creativity, and that's obvious, that has certainly been very present about responsible AI use. But talk to me a little bit about, as Oberlin's gone through its explanation, where have you seen some flashpoints? Where have you encountered some moments of tensions where something that you might have been interested in, you guys deemed as having too much of a trade-off? How has this question of responsibility shown up in the way that Oberlin's been looking at this?
Yeah, it's I mean, I would be kidding myself if I said that we didn't have, the bumps and valleys along the way. We started off this year of AI exploration with a survey that went out to our core users, our faculty group, our staff group, and our student group. And what we saw surprisingly was an alignment between all three groups of our campus community and what their concerns were, what their fears, what their reservations were. We certainly have folks that are very interested and already using AI. As a matter of fact, before we even engaged with this journey, we knew from an IT organization that roughly 1,600 users on campus were actively using AI of some variation. And that really presents a couple different concerns, right? So you have the security concern. If they're using freeware, free versions, who owns that intellectual property? Sometimes with some of the clauses that are in Anthropic or OpenAI, that stuff can be ingested into its large language model to train its system. But we were also looking at it from an equity situation where we had students that could afford to pay for these bigger, better, stronger models were doing so, and students who could not were then left with the free versions. But thinking about like the student curiosity, the student creativity element, I think curiosity becomes even more important right now in a world of AI. AI can generate answers quickly. It can give the competitive advantage, so to speak. But I think really what we're going to see is, as we continue to equip our students with these tools, with the literacy about these tools, with the ethical responsibility of questioning and using these tools, the competitive advantage shifts from just being able to know the answers to asking the better questions. And you know, our goal at Oberlin is not just to give access to advanced technologies; it's to teach our students to become more thoughtful and more informed users of those technologies. You know, I had a conversation with one of our career readiness advisors a number of weeks ago. And they're seeing, like we said before, I can't remember. I think it was you, Jesse, who said, you know, we're seeing an increasing number of job postings that have AI as like a core competency for placement. And this means that, you know, we have to move with the times, not really to keep up with the Joneses, like I said, but really as an authentic and genuine desire to equip our students to be better stewards of how this technology is used, how AI works, where it excels, where it fails, and really like where are the emerging biases coming from with AI? What are the marginalized voices that are not being included in some of the conversations around AI? And so we also need to equip our students and even our faculty and staff to be able to verify the outputs with human judgment. I saw somebody in the chat say that they left a webinar because they felt like somebody just ran everything through AI and they were giving them a line. And being able to think through, what are my students saying? What are my faculty members saying? What are we doing as staff? And kind of operating those critical thinking skills are really going to be powerful as we move forward. And so I think we should really be encouraging our students to see AI as, you know, this collaborative tool, not the authority when it comes to knowledge. That's when learning stops. That's when cognitive offloading, you know, transitions to cognitive debt. I think the students in the coming years who will thrive in the future, and not necessarily, well, let me rephrase that. So I think the AI that we have today is going to continue to advance. I think the jobs that are currently on the market right now are going to change. And the students who are going to take those jobs, who are going to succeed, are the ones who are going to remain curious and ask the very hard questions. They are going to be the ones who can evaluate the information critically. They're going to be able to understand context. They're going to be able to combine the technical adaptability with also the human insight and creativity. And so those should be the central qualities that we're trying to cultivate in our students. And really, I think, and Bob, you may agree with me, that's really the core of what a liberal arts education does. You know, these become more and more valuable as technology progresses, and especially as we're looking into this age of AI. The human in the loop has to remain. You know, not to plug a book, but Ethan Mollick wrote Co-Intelligence. It's been kind of a critical body of research for how I've approached this whole AI thing, in that, you know, the human has to remain in the loop and the AI remains just as the tool that extends the human's capability of getting through some of the really, you know, tedious requisite tasks. I was speaking to a professor just the other day about, you know, our Bloom's taxonomy of hierarchy. And I think where we are at, and this particular professor agreed with me, is as AI becomes more of the recall level of learning, we want to equip our students to act at that higher level of learning. We want them to be able to synthesize the information, to create the information, to be able to perform new and novel tasks and rely less on just I know the answer to the question. I need to be able to be asking the questions.
Troy, I'll come to you in a sec, but Bob, does that resonate? Sort of Chris' comments and kind of thinking about liberal arts education at this particular moment?
I have been on the road talking about, I think AI is going to be a call back to the liberal education as the principal currency for the future. Because again, the technical education is going to be offloaded, but the work of thinking and synthesizing, asking the right questions, analyzing the input you've gotten, that is what we need to do and we need to do well. And I think we've historically tried to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny how these things are all pendulum swings, and we should never think about higher ed in absolutes, right? Just a few years ago, it was, you know, you got to get a STEM degree, liberal arts is done, and now it's, oh my goodness, liberal arts is the skill that everyone needs to navigate these tools. We're going to go to Q&A in just a second. I see we've got some great feedback in there, but Troy, I want to give you the kind of like last slice at this responsibility question. One of the things that I really love that you are participating in this conversation is, you know, you have a lot of, you are talking to many institutions, right? You're having a chance to actually hear from people about what they're struggling with. What are you hearing from institutional leaders? Like, is there a through line of, are there things where they're like, wow, we really wish we had this guardrail? Is there kind of a clustering around some of the concerns you're hearing? Just give us a reflection on the insights that you're gaining as you talk about this.
Yeah, for sure. First, I want to go back to something Chris was just saying in regards to Bloom's taxonomy. I think that's really interesting because that's all about critical thinking, right? Which is really what we task our higher ed institutions to instill in students. And so I love that they're looking through that lens. The question becomes, how do you really operationalize and scale that across your student body? And that's something that we've deeply thought about. And in fact, we've sort of in the back end of our product baked in Bloom's taxonomy. And so, for example, when a student uploads a draft of their work, we're conceptually understanding and contextually understanding their argumentation and their critical thinking, and we're sort of assigning a level of Bloom's taxonomy to that, and then prompting the student, not through rewrites or producing content, but prompting the student through feedback, higher orders on Bloom taxonomy and how to reapproach their writing. And so it's that type of formative feedback workflow that we're sort of building in that ability to think more critically about their own work. So I just want to address that first. Responsible AI use. I'm gonna post an article here from the New York Times recently. I think it was just a week ago, talking about a lot of these solutions that are emerging right now that, in my view, are just very irresponsible, especially when they're pointed to higher ed. Now, many of these are productivity based, and so when you point that at corporate world, fine. That's you can index on productivity in the corporate world or in the workplace. But in higher education, it's not about getting to the end result. It's about that learning journey and about educational outcomes and pedagogy first, not technical capability. And so I think responsible AI use, and I think on the behalf of technologists being responsible in this particular space, we have to have AI for learning and skill development and not AI for productivity. And so we reject that. And we also reject both extremes, that unrestricted AI replacement on one end, and then on the other end, surveillance and punishment and sort of that punitive environment. We reject both those extremes. And so that's how we're trying to sort of cut through.
That's great. Thank you. Bob, go, please.
One other thing, we've talked a lot about students. I think this is something, if I heard Chris say, Oberlin paid attention to. It actually, and it relates to some of the comments in the chat. We have to be cognizant that our faculty are also trying to figure out how to navigate this. And so an important starting point is making sure that we are engaging our faculty so they have a certain level of comprehension in what AI can and cannot do. Because if we don't get the faculty in the place where they're seeing this picture more fully, then A, the experimentation is going to work as well, but B, we're not going to be able to give the students the interactive education that we need to give in any sort of effective way. So I just wanted to put an anchor down that we can't lose sight of the fact that the faculty sit at the intersection of good pedagogy. And if we're not paying attention to their skills, their understanding, their comfort, then nothing else we're going to get right.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, Bob, I really want to highlight that. I agree completely with you. One of the things that we set out for this year was to start with faculty intentionally. And we got a little bit of flack from our students saying, why don't we have access? Why did faculty have access? But really, it was an intentional ability to allow the faculty to practice with this thing, to explore this thing, to change their syllabi, to update their academic integrity language, and to feel prepared for when the students will start to have the access, and start to really kind of think about how does this intersect with, whether you consider pedagogy or andragogy, child learning, adult learning. It's a swath based on the discipline, right? And I think where we have the most capability are students coming in. They don't have those formative experiences that our faculty have. They're still trying to garner, being a student, much less getting involved with a particular discipline. The faculty have the ability to sit back and say, where does this fit within my discipline? Where does it fit within the didactic content that I'm going to be presenting to my students? How do I need to adjust or pivot my pedagogy so that I can either allow for this, or so that I can set a firm boundary of, hey, we're not using it in my class, or we're using it in my class, but within this parameter. And what we found was the faculty really resonated with that approach. It was important for them to feel like we heard them, and that they felt like they were equipped. My team in particular, along with others on campus, we spent 6 months doing, somewhere in the neighborhood of 14, 15 different workshops. And then we actually took our general faculty conference meetings that happened every month and brought in an expert in the field, whether it be a faculty or an administrator or somebody who was doing something cool with AI, flew them in, and gave them opportunities to present to our faculty at large. And that has really, I think, changed the perspective from this, curiosity, concern, hesitancy to more of, okay, well, what does this mean for my teaching? What does this mean for our college?
Well, one last thing, Jesse, and it's worth remembering that increasingly students coming to our colleges have more AI literacy than some of our faculty do, because they have been using it. They have been using it now for the last 4 years. And it's unusual for our faculty to be at an information deficit relative to our students. But in this space, they are. And again, if we don't start with the faculty, that deficit's going to have implications that will have an impact on what we're trying to do.
That's a really interesting consideration for sure. I want to get to a couple questions, actually. And so the first one that I want to respond to, actually, we've touched on it thematically, but I actually think the question's framed in a very interesting and specific way. Chris, it gets a little bit at something you were saying in your last set of remarks. So I'm going to read it. It's from Jeffrey Ream. It says, I'd like to know what you think about the idea that AI is an agent, not a tool. A hammer doesn't tell you how to use it. Statistics softwares famously don't tell you how to use it. AI tells you how to use it and constantly volunteers to take over your project. That's an interesting insight. Troy, Chris, and Troy's a technologist. Chris, you've obviously been working with, how do you respond to that question?
Yeah, I think one of the main problems that we've recognized in the IT space within our college is that many of the academic softwares are coming pre-baked with AI. We use Blackboard as our learning management system on campus. Blackboard has rolled out a new agent, and as a matter of fact, it just shows up now in the right side menu. It says your agents, and that is alarming to some faculty, where they feel like AI is kind of asserting itself into their creative work, into their day-to-day opportunities. And I agree with what the individual was saying in the chat, in that, yeah, AI does come with the user manual, whereas the hammer doesn't necessarily do that. But when I say that AI is just a tool in our toolbox, I mean that we need to decide how we're using the tool to solve the problem, and starting with the problem first. A lot of times, what I like to call clicky, clicky, bling, bling. It's just, flashy, it's new, it's exciting. We want to get it. We want to be involved with it. And we want to have that bling, right? But then we figure out, oh, great, we got this thing. What do we do with it? And so we really need to start with, well, what is the creative endeavor that we're trying to solve? What is the gap in our operational experiences with our, we're moving from an ERP solution to a new ERP solution. How is AI going to help us with that? With tickets that come into the IT help desk, how can AI help us with that? Not, let's get this tool first and figure out where we can shove it into our daily work. So yeah, it's a hard question to really answer, because we are still figuring out what it means for us. And it means something different to everybody based on, where you sit within the academy. If you're a student, if you're a faculty, if you're a staff member. But regardless of where you sit, it's here. It is taking us over as a societal, concern. And so really, from an administrative perspective, we have the obligation and also the duty to really bring our students up to speed with the literacy. To Bob's point, yeah, sometimes they're surpassing even our faculty. And so what do we need to do to increase the faculty literacy? We're hoping that, and we haven't figured out what this looks like, but we're hoping that as we finish our year of exploration, we enter into a period of exploration, or of experimentation. Like, we're thinking about little micro grants for faculty and staff and students to do some research on AI and find those intersects. And then from there, we may decide to pilot a few tools, and if we have the creative need for them. And then from there, we can start to build individual pathways for how our staff might interject themselves with AI, or how our faculty are going to use it within their teaching practices.
Bob, Chris's mention of clicky clicky bling bling.
I use that phrase every day.
That's right, exactly. As a leader, what are you finding is the balance between you having to pull on the reins for people that are like you're really eager to get this stuff, versus you having to kind of crack the whip to encourage to your peers to use this stuff?
The good news is I had a member of my faculty very anxious and ready to take on the lead on this. And so he came to me together with a group of people who had gone through an AAC and U work group. And so I think this is not a place to force adoption. This is a place to encourage experimentation. There are going to be people who are going to be on the leading edge, and there are going to be people who are going to be way back. I think we have to engage the campus in a conversation. Eventually, we'll come to a Gettysburg position on this. As we said earlier, not yet. But right now, if you don't want to engage with AI, as long as we are clear about what students can and cannot do in the classroom to avoid the concern Troy identified, then I'm largely okay with that right now. This is not a moment to force adoption. Let's figure out more before we get anywhere close to that. And we may never get to the point, Jesse, of forced adoption in any case, because that tends not to be the way the academy functions because of the heterogeneity of pedagogical goals, disciplinary objectives, and the like.
Yeah, that's right. So we are running really close to time. We have Troy. Actually, I want to bring this last comment to you because there's a question that kind of was in response to something you said, which is Renee remarks that it's interesting that Bloom's taxonomy, which is from 1950, is coming up in AI conversations today. And she's wondering, and you spend some time working and talking with students. Do students know and understand their own cognition? Like how much are students aware of this taxonomy, and that we're intentionally moving them through it?
Well, so in our approach, and by the way, Bloom's taxonomy, even though it was, kind of developed in the 50s, it's still highly relevant today because at the end of the day, we're talking about critical thinking and how that's being supplanted by AI. And so leveraging that framework, that hierarchy, I think still is highly relevant in this landscape. But as for our unique approach, the taxonomy sort of lives in the background. It's not that we're teaching them about the pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy. It's more that we're using that as a framework in how we approach the formative feedback cycle in the iterative drafting process of writing a paper. So it might say, it might kind of try to understand where the writing is falling on that scale, and then prompt them to that higher order and give them, some prompts and suggestions on how they might revisit their writing.
That's awesome.
So it's not necessarily overt in that feedback cycle. It's just more the model by which it uses to prompt those critical thinking exercises in their work.
For sure, absolutely. Well, that is going to bring us right up about to our time. So I want to thank all three of you for this discussion. I thought this was a really lively, interesting dialogue on a topic that we know is really important and complex. And I feel like you guys really covered a ton of ground in terms of the dimension that campus leaders are struggling with. I want to thank our audience. Like the discussion in the chat was really great. I saw a lot of people interacting with each other, raising some good points. If you got a lot out of this webinar, please send the team a note. We love to get feedback on this stuff. And I'm just really glad that we had the chance to talk about this. And I'm sure the first of many similar conversations to come as the sector continues to talk about this issue. So Troy, Chris, Bob, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Take care, everyone.